The list of games with majestic OSTs is truly enormous, yet I'm not sure if someone would argue with the fact that The Elder Scrolls S1 is somewhere at the top. Mesmerizing tunes of Jeremy Soule have been accompanying many of us since our childhood, and today we'll make a small dive into it and try to unravel the secrets behind its enchanting beauty. However, before we'll touch upon each individual game's soundtrack and see what's so unique about it, I think we need to make ourselves acquainted with their author and his prior work in order to understand the context better. Jeremy Soule was born in Keokuk, Iowa. His parents were both people of art, father a school music teacher and mother a graphic designer. So no wonder he decided to dedicate his life to such a creative endeavor. It's even cooler that he had a brother, which also gotten into the same field and collaborated with Jeremy on many occasions. Should have been really inspiring to have such a comrade in art. I really wouldn't want to burden you with details of his early life and retell all of the Wikipedia. It suffices to say that his affinity toward music was present since he was a little kid, and that he was enormously talented at that.
My mom actually has examples of my early attempts at handwriting and my early attempts of notation, and I could properly notate before I could write my own name. So I guess I was just sort of born with it.
It's pretty crazy to think that Jeremy had been working in the industry since he was 19, starting with the soundtrack for Secrets of Evermore. In the later interviews, he shares the difficulties of working with MIDI and how much tied his hands were.
The Super Nintendo Entertainment System was my start, and it had relatively little memory to work with. In fact, after it loaded the driver, I had about 53K of RAM to work with to make not only the sounds, the instruments themselves, but also the music. As music sort of trundles along, it burns data, and specifically a MIDI call that says note on, this pitch, at this volume, and note off. In fact, we didn't even have that much sophistication with the Nintendo. It was notes on, at this pitch, and notes off, and then it just moved on. It was very simple, but 53K of RAM would not power. I'm not sure it'd power anything anymore. I don't know what runs on that small amount of memory.
And even considering the limitations of his tools and lack of experience in creating soundtracks, the guy cooked up music like this, or this. What a mad lad. Afterwards, he worked on bangers like Total Annihilation or Icewind Dale, even made a contribution into his first Elder Scrolls game Redguard, yet the real gem which brought him worldwide fame was Harry Potter in the Sorcerer's Stone game, on which soundtracks Soule brothers been working together and which got nominated to a bunch of awards. They even got a BAFTA for Chamber of Secrets afterwards. It is really mind-blowing to think that the first Harry Potter game came out 2 weeks after the movie, and based on the fact that Jeremy most likely haven't worked with the movie's composer John Williams, a 26 years old guy created a piece which captured the essence of the books and could even rival the one of Williams, who was already an established legend and worked on classics such as Home Alone, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Indiana Jones, or Star Wars. I find it kind of funny because eventually Jeremy came to work on Star Wars as well, creating an OST for Bounty Hunter and KOTOR. Had to drop it in because the latter game really bothers my biscuit. A year prior to the Old Republic game, our composer comes to work on the topic of our interest, and we'll come to it shortly, but I just need at least to show a wiki page with his other projects he worked on in between and sometimes even together with the Elder Scrolls, so that we wouldn't forget what a savage the guy really is. I'd also need to remark that Jeremy, at least according to his interviews, was fond of Bethesda and had a lot of fun working with them and enjoying a healthy amount of artistic freedom. Bethesda had full trust in the guy and left it all up to him, thus the incredible result.
You know, decision by committee is one of the worst things in the world, and I think it's like architecture is the same thing. I mean, you have an architect that comes in, and, you know, generally the greatest architects are the ones that I think have really the force of personality to push through and say, no, this is what I'm going to do.
I think it laid pretty well on his creative process as well, where he usually really wants to know how the world he's writing for ticks, and what tools he can use in order to bring that world to life musically. It is also interesting that none of the tracks for the Elder Scrolls were written or somehow changed. So it's pretty cool that the author made a pretty monolithic product for each of the games.
I don't think I had a single revision or a change to anything I've ever written in the entire series.
It was a perfect masterpiece which took on its complete form from the beginning, a seemingly rare occasion as far as creative endeavor goes. And now finally we come to Morrowind's soundtrack. I'm going to be a little banal and tell you that it must have been not an easy feat to create music that would represent such an alien and eccentric world that Morrowind, an island of Wardenfell, is. Here is what Jeremy told us about the artistic process during development. In a waking moment from a dream, familiarity somehow coexists with a strange newness that can overwhelm the senses. Anything tangible is overtaken by the feeling of being in two worlds, neither of which are distinct. This music was my impression of that state. It was an approach meant to diffuse oral focus and a shift to the visual nature of the Morrowind adventure. Melodic beats, which typically give strong narrative direction, were replaced with harmonic color, and the world becomes a dream. For this directionless frame of mind leaves an opening for many interpretations, all reinforcing a personal connection to the game. I think this quote really underlines the whole approach toward the series' music from him. It feels almost ethereal, and very fitting for the world of Tamriel word, magical. Yet it's not the only thing that makes his music so distinctive. Quoting a Machstein Agency article, Jeremy Soule has made a name for himself with his versatility, dedication to his projects both large and small, and for his ability to create a full and convincing orchestral sound with his proprietary sample database that is indistinguishable from the real thing. I think this quote pays respect towards some of the author's best professional qualities, where his music is indeed convincing and indistinguishable from a real thing, but I don't really think that it's the main reason why Jeremy's music is so beloved. We need to remember that we have video game music in our focus, and the main focus of video games are the games themselves. A game is something that consists of many bricks, like gameplay, story, graphics, etc., which are very important in of itself, yet are not independent, and in an ideal case do not hog all of the blanket on top of themselves. Music in such a medium should really accompany the events rather than be in the center, which what we have in case where music is sole proprietor. It's an art to write music which you hear for hundreds of hours and it doesn't get old. It builds on all of the atmosphere, has a certain taste and texture, yet it's humble enough not to be in the forefront, sitting in the corner and webbing all of the magic from afar. And in my opinion, this is where Soule's strength lies in. We can see that on the example of Morrowind's soundtrack, which lasts a little bit over an hour, but was used as a base for the future game's iterations and is repeatedly used in such a giant game. I think Jeremy cracked the enigma of good gaming music in a simple and very elegant way. And as we know, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. To better understand what I mean, let's give Morrowind's soundtrack a listen to see what tricks does our composer use. From the get-go, we spot a very simple melody. Just one instrument, only few chords are used, which is also true for most of the other tracks at the beginning. Now we hear how another instrument replies to the previous one, and that's where we have a new layer. Pay attention to the melody, which doesn't really deviate from what we had at the beginning. Instead of that, to create this feeling of complexity, our composer uses a barrage of instruments, stacking the orchestration on top of each other without creating the harmonic development, which usually takes a lot of listeners' attention. He creates a deep and full melody which doesn't take away from experiencing the game because our brain doesn't need to analyze the melodic cultivation. It just becomes an unseen part of the background. Jeremy uses a lot of inversions, plays with registers, uses many layered structure, which rhymes, flows and amps. His music is diatonic, which means that all of the notes are played in perfect fifths. A very pattern-oriented music, which our brains just love. The guy freaking hacked our grey matter in order to make his way into our To Study and Relax to playlist. And as far as instruments go, we also have a lot of different actors. Strings are represented by violins, cellos, double basses, serve as a base for melodies and create the needed lush, which we can hear while listening to Never Rising, for example. Percussion is made by classic cymbals, snares and bass drums. The more exotic instrument like timpani gives music more tribal and a Schlander vibe, which can be felt listening to the fighting themes, for example. Woodwinds like flutes and clarinets are subtly used to give the music more atmosphere and layers. Flutes also solo some time in peaceful moments to give a softer feel while reprising the main melody. Brass in the form of horns, trumpets and trombones gives some tracks the feeling of grandeur and power, as used in the main theme and battle music, for example. Fun fact, the main theme has a French horn performing solo, by the way. Harp and piano are also there but appear rarely. Harp can be heard in quieter parts where it gives the music a magical texture and a sense of divinity, and piano is used for assertive and intimate reprise. Jeremy also uses lots of choir and ambient sounds, which sometimes are hard to hear, yet are an integral part of the whole piece. Hey guys, if you watched till here, I'd urge you to subscribe and leave a like. I really try to put myself into those videos, so I would really appreciate it. You can also unsub at any time. Thanks. Working on Oblivion, Jeremy became almost literally a new person, surviving a car crash, contemplating his whole sense of life anew. As a commentary on his creative process, he said that this time he didn't imagine any events or characters, instead he made a comment on the human condition and the beauty of life, stating that life is indeed precious. And I think one could really feel this shift in his music, where Morrowind is more grounded and, I don't know, tribal again. The music of Oblivion is rather ethereal and somehow heavenly. I don't want to bother you by counting all of the utilized instruments for Oblivion's music. They didn't really change since the time of Morrowind, because Jeremy uses more or less the same audio library. The arrangement of those instruments is another topic, however. As already mentioned, the music became much more ethereal, and what can be more ethereal than a harp? This instrument has taken a much more prominent place and made the land of Tamriel feel significantly more unique than it actually is, in my humble opinion. I also just love how harps lay beautifully on the aesthetic of Islate ruins. Cello has become considerably more prominent as well, taking place in every soundtrack and even having its own solos. Violin and flute got their minute of fame too, at times soloing as well. For more authenticity, Jeremy used lots of Celtic inspirations, where we can hear their harmonies mostly in battle tracks. With the music, we can also observe the thing that will also become a feature of the next Elder Scrolls soundtracks: reimagining. A lot of different parts from Morrowind's OST were utilized in order to create Oblivions. Some might say that it's lazy, but in my opinion it only adds to the games and their world. The Elder Scrolls music already has a certain carcass and feel. You wouldn't mix it up with any other OST thanks to Jeremy's talent. So putting new meat on the same carcass touches upon Play's feeling of nostalgia, makes you feel like you are in the same world but in a different place, which makes this experience more unique and engaging. There are many Oblivion tracks which use Morrowind samples as reference, but the most prominent examples are, of course, the main theme, and Through the Valleys, which is a reimagining of Mora's Still Sunrise. In conclusion, and in yours truly opinion, Oblivion's soundtrack is the best The Elder Scrolls soundtrack, flowing into mainstream, being used for memes, videos, having dozens of covers and reworks. Or maybe it's just nostalgia kicking, because the next soundtrack is not worse at all. Oblivion has been an enormous success, bringing Mr. Soul another BAFTA nomination and a few awards from MTV and Xbox magazine. Life is good, Bethesda is bigger than ever, and our beloved Todd Howard comes up with a bunch of ideas for his next hit, and spills a few of them onto Jeremy. Bethesda's king wanted to stray away from the musicality of the previous games, leading the music into a more aggressive direction, and partially it was indeed the case. I think most of us know the whole story with the Skyrim's main theme, how Emil made up a dragon language for it, which like for real is an impressive fit, props to him. The main theme became indeed stronger and kinda primal. This was of course also true for most of the battle music. In Skyrim's OST, Jeremy used an extensive amount of choir and obviously was inspired by the music of the northern folks. Critiques even compare the sound of Skyrim's OST to famous Nordic artists like Edvard Grieg or Gin Sibelius. Thankfully, Jeremy didn't get too far from the melodic songs of the past. The exploration tracks are of course a good example of that. Secunda goes brrr, you know the drill. What is also very prominent for Skyrim's music is that the landscape rhymes with it very well, creating a perfect synthesis and a precise representation of what one sees in the game. Agreeing with Kyle E. Miller from RPG Fan, our composer indeed created a perfect soundtrack for Hiking and Awake, Distant Horizons, Far Horizons, Sky Above, Ways Within, Ancient Stones, and Frostfall. Are all great examples of that. In Skyrim we are also introduced to the tavern soundtracks, which have a completely different vibe from other music of the game. They remind of medieval harmonies and for real sound like something that sturdy nerds of Skyrim would vibe to. The instruments used for Skyrim's music stood more or less the same in comparison to the previous games, with an introduction of dulcimer, which appears in Ancient Stones, and duduk, which you can hear in Tundra. All in all, the music became more grandeur, at times fiddly barbaric, and, I don't know, somehow cold and fresh. Yet I can't really bring any instruments up like in Oblivion's or Morrowind's case, because this soundtrack is just ginormous and very different in its vibe. The OST for Skyrim became the biggest one out of them all, amounting to more than 3.5 hours, where Morrowind and Oblivion have those 3 times shorter. This was indeed a titanic work, but to truly understand what an artistic savage Jeremy really is, I'd like to give you a breakdown of Ancient Stones made by Maestro himself. It'll be a lengthy long read and I'll butcher the song a little in order for it to pass to the given description, so if you want to skip it, press on this time mark. For me, music is a literal language, and like some multilingual persons, it is sometimes difficult for me to clearly express what is going on in my head. To illustrate my process, I sometimes speak in English as my music is being performed, to describe in real time what each phrase is communicating. It is a neat party trick. Some composers are shy or indignant about disclosing their back process. I am not, and I wish more composers would speak more about their creative process. That said, I don't want to seem self-indulgent with an arduously long post. But for those that are interested, I want to provide a window into the intense factoring that goes on each and every time I create music. So why am I doing all of this when I make music? I want to always move the player forward. And with Skyrim, I also wanted to instill a sense of purpose in the environment in spite of the various adversaries or intimidating landscape, all frequently seen in the game. This composition was challenging despite the slow tempo and monolithic movements. My multi-layered approach was to embolden the player with a narrative. This was accomplished through a specific structure. The first part of my structure device was the acknowledgement of adversity. The second was to provide an enlightening incentive to overcome the adversity, and the third part of my construct was to provide a sense of scale of the world to create relevance for the entire idiom, the frame of the painting. Overall, I wanted the theme of the narrative to be about a dark hope and an illustration of an almost unsaid acknowledgement of a repressed truth. This narrative also starts with a metaphor. In this metaphor, I presented what I call the walker, or soul, whose footsteps are represented in plodding half notes. The next cast members of this metaphor include nature, light, darkness, and death itself, adversity. Representing adversity, the male voices in plodding half notes bring a cold and icy reality, which reveals a lumbering walk to the end of the life. Death is the truest adversity in literature, yet this death pattern becomes lifted from these darkened voices to be transfigured and answered as a voice of the natural world, in this case the violins. As nature lifts the countenance of this death walk, light in female voices begins to pour into the path of the walker. A placid texture of nature brings a calm setting before a burdened soloist introduces a concept of spiritual redemption, the incentive, and a pronouncement of a greater truth. His texture also represents the purest form of bravery, as he is both cautious and meek, again the incentive. His message is affirmed as truth by the light of nature, represented in the female voices. But at 2:37, these women's voices sing something more urgent and pleading. I wanted their message to be an intercession for life and a balance to darkness heard at the beginning of the world. The phrase delivery is of an intense and painful love, or something almost beyond love. It is almost that they are saying, hurry for the sake of your eternal joy. Yet there is a knowing balance here that leaves room for the individual to determine their own fate. The strings of nature at 3:19 are meant to create a sense of opening arms and hands that are being dropped to either side as if to uplift the walker. Yet none of this is meant to provoke a decision on the part of him. The concept is reintroduced in the strings at 3:59 with a lament of life by the light and ultimate acceptance of the purpose of the darkness at 4:25. The new octaves faintly heard in the female voices represent a respectful acknowledgement of death at this point. At 5:12, in a sort of a vignette of this world, the male and female voices combine to represent an illustration of the marriage of death and life, the sense of scale. Yet the message now is carried forth without an intended recipient, again meant to illustrate scale through an impersonal delivery. The bleeding of life dissipates into the natural world, but at 5:49 nature is alone. This also represents the frame of the composition. Of course, none of what I've written above addresses the underlying musical theory elements and choices I have made out of sheer musicality concerns in performance. However, they are all linked. I hope some of this makes sense. Again, I simply wanted to provide a bit of a window into my process. And if you read this far, I applaud you. Good job. You are as crazy as I am. And now just imagine that the same thought process stays behind all of the music created by him. And yeah, Skyrim's soundtrack also uses a lot of references from Morrowind and Oblivion. Dragonborn uses the structure of Reigns of Septim, which in its place is a reworked Nerevar Rising. The Gerald Mountains is a rework of Oblivion's Through the Valleys, which in its place is a rework of Morrowind's Silt Sunrise. And Broken Road also takes motive from Reign of Septim, which actually kinda sounds like Pirates of Caribbean main theme. There are, of course, loads of other small bits and pieces snatched from previous titles, but my favorite callback is to Couture's Bastilla Chance theme, which we can hear in Distant Horizons. Now I don't really want to dive into the whole accusations which were thrown onto him, or what a BS the whole Northerner deal was. The thing that I know is that his career was practically ended, nobody wants to deal with him, and since his small core working on Morrowind expansions music for The Elder Scrolls Online, Jeremy didn't really work on anything The Elder Scrolls related. Unfortunately, and almost certainly, we won't see Jeremy's hand in The Elder Scrolls 6. Besides the whole carcass of music he made already. Yet he left an enormous legacy, and this cannot be taken from us. I want to end this video on a pretty symbolic note with the last composition he made for Skyrim, The Wind Guide You, and Jeremy's commentary on it. Wind Guide You is the last composition I composed for Skyrim. The reference to Minstrel's lament from Oblivion was intentional. It was my way of saying goodbye, as I considered my role to be somewhat akin to a minstrel. Hey, don't go away. Thank you guys for staying tuned. If you like this video, please check my other video on why Skyrim is so controversial. It's a good vid, I promise. Thank you guys one more time for watching, and stay tuned because there is much more to come. I love you and have a good one.